In the summer of 2007, rush hour traffic crawled across the Interstate 35W bridge in Minneapolis. The 8-lane steel truss structure had carried vehicles over the Mississippi River for 40 years. On August 1st, at 6:05 in the evening, the bridge collapsed without warning. 13 people died. 145 were injured. The failure took less than 15 seconds. Investigators would later determine that the collapse was not sudden in the way it appeared. The bridge had been failing for years. The Interstate 35W bridge opened to traffic in 1967. It was designed to handle an estimated daily load of 66,000 vehicles. By the early 2000s, that number had climbed to over 140,000. The bridge was also supporting construction equipment and materials that summer. Workers were resurfacing the deck. The 260 tons of aggregate and concrete sat directly over the weakest sections of the structure. Engineers had identified problems with the bridge as early as 1990. During a routine inspection, they documented corrosion and fatigue cracks in the steel gusset plates. These plates connected the truss members and were critical to the bridge's stability. The Minnesota Department of Transportation rated the bridge as structurally deficient. That designation did not mean the bridge was unsafe to use. It meant repairs were needed. Over the next 17 years, inspectors returned regularly. They noted additional cracking, bowing, and deterioration. Reports were filed. Some repairs were made. The bridge remained open. Traffic continued to increase. In 2001, the University of Minnesota conducted a study and recommended that the bridge be replaced within 10 years. The state legislature did not allocate funding for replacement. Instead, maintenance continued on a limited basis. Inspections became more frequent, but the underlying issues were not addressed. By 2005, the bridge's sufficiency rating had dropped to 50 out of a possible 100. Federal guidelines recommended replacement or major rehabilitation for any bridge scoring below 50. The Minnesota Department of Transportation added the bridge to a list of structures requiring attention. It was one of more than 1,000 bridges in the state classified as structurally deficient. Funding remained limited. Prioritization was based on available resources and perceived risk. In June 2007, just weeks before the collapse, yet another inspection took place. Inspectors photographed the gusset plates and documented ongoing deterioration. They noted bowing in several critical joints. The inspection report did not recommend closing the bridge. It recommended continued monitoring and eventual replacement. The decision-making process that kept the bridge open reflected a common challenge in infrastructure management. Engineers and officials had to balance safety concerns against practical realities. Closing a major bridge would create significant disruption. Commuters would face detours of several miles. Emergency response times would increase. Economic activity would slow. Without clear evidence of imminent danger, the decision was made to maintain operations while planning for eventual replacement. This approach was not unusual. Across the country, thousands of aging bridges remained in service while awaiting funding for major work. The assumption was that regular inspections would detect problems before they became critical. Visual assessments, load testing, and documentation were considered sufficient to manage risk. The system relied on the premise that structural failures would provide warning signs. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the collapse for more than a year. They reconstructed the bridge digitally and tested samples of the original steel. Their conclusion was clear. The gusset plates had been undersized from the beginning. Design calculations from 1967 revealed an error. The plates were only half as thick as they needed to be for the loads they would carry. This design flaw alone did not cause the collapse. The bridge had stood for 40 years, and what changed was the accumulation of stress. Increased traffic, heavier vehicles, and the weight of construction materials all contributed. The gusset plates, already inadequate, were pushed beyond their capacity. On the evening of August 1st, several plates failed simultaneously. The structure lost integrity. The center span fell first, pulling the approach spans down with it. Records indicate that the design error was not discovered until after the collapse. The original calculations had been filed and forgotten. No one in 2007 knew the plates were undersized. Inspectors had focused on visible corrosion and cracking. They did not question the fundamental design. The engineering firm that designed the bridge in the 1960s had followed standard practices of the time. Computer modeling was limited. Calculations were performed by hand or with basic mechanical tools. Margins of safety were built into designs, but errors could occur. Once construction was complete and the bridge entered service, there was little reason to revisit the original engineering work. The assumption was that if a bridge performed well initially, the design was sound. This assumption created a gap in the inspection process. Inspectors evaluated the condition of existing components. They looked for signs of wear, damage, or environmental degradation. They did not reassess whether the original design met current standards or could handle increased loads. The protocols in place were reactive rather than proactive. Weather conditions on the day of the collapse were unremarkable. Temperature, wind, and precipitation were all within normal ranges. There was no earthquake, no impact from a vehicle or vessel, no extraordinary event that could explain the failure. The bridge simply reached a point where it could no longer support the demands placed upon it. Historians of infrastructure failure often point to the I-35W bridge as an example of systemic neglect rather than individual error. The bridge was one of thousands across the United States that had been built during a period of rapid expansion in the 1960s and 70s. Many of those structures were reaching the end of their design lives. Funding for maintenance and replacement had not kept pace with the scale of the need. After the collapse, Congress passed legislation to increase funding for bridge inspection and repair. Minnesota prioritized infrastructure investment. The I-35W bridge was replaced within 14 months, and the new structure opened in September 2008. The economic cost of the collapse extended beyond the immediate reconstruction. Businesses near the bridge lost revenue. Commuters faced longer travel times for years. The state paid settlements to victims and their families. Estimates suggest the total economic impact exceeded $400 million. The I-35W bridge collapse was not the result of a single decision or a moment of recklessness. It was the outcome of decades of deferred maintenance, limited resources, and an assumption that visible inspections were sufficient. The design flaw went undetected because the system relied on the accuracy of past work. The gradual accumulation of stress went unaddressed because the bridge appeared stable. In the end, what seemed manageable became catastrophic, and the cost of waiting became far greater than the cost of action would have been.